Hey, this is Carrie from Wrap Your Head Around Silks. This is the Expecting Aerialist podcast, now part of the Digitent Podcast Network. Hope you guys are doing well. Thanks for tuning in. Here in America, it's voting week, so it's our midterm elections. Lots going on there. I'm a political junkie, so I'm following it every moment. What's going on with the House races and Senate races, etc. And today I have my friend Masha. She is a Ukrainian aerialist who is, I should say, Ukrainian-American aerialist, and has lived here since she was a little kid. But I had been wanting ever since the Ukraine-Russian war started to invite someone on who had a unique perspective. Being Ukrainian and knowing people there and working with people there and having family living there. So today is unlike my other podcasts because we didn't really talk about Ariel at all. We just kind of dived into her perspective and her experience since the war has begun. So a little bit of a shift for us here, but just buckle up for a talk about current world events. And I'm really excited for you guys to meet Masha. She's super smart and an amazing woman. She's one of my students at the loft, but a friend as well. All right, guys. Let's get started. I call her Masha Bear. Her first name's Masha, but I call her Masha Bear because she's my student. She's my friend. But my daughter is obsessed with Masha and the Bear. Masha is a Ukrainian aerialist, and I wanted to get her on here just to talk about her very unique perspective on the world right now. Masha, you want to say hi and introduce yourself a little bit?
Hi, my name's Masha. I was born in Ukraine, but when I was 2, I moved with my family to the States. And actually, we mostly spoke Russian at home. And that was really common, especially people who lived in Ukraine in like big cities. And mostly people speak Ukrainian in Western Ukraine and in villages. And so it gets really confusing for people that, growing up, also no one really knew about Ukraine. So everyone would be like, oh, where are you from? And be like, Ukraine. They're like, where's that? And I just kind of have to be like, okay, Russia. And then they'd be like, well, what language do you speak at home? Well, Russian. Okay, so you're Russian, but you just happen to be living in Ukraine. I'm like, but my ancestors lived in Ukraine. But in the end, these little semantics don't really matter too much. When I was younger, I did rhythmic gymnastics, and that's like the gymnastics with ribbons and balls, and there's a lot of focus on grace and flexibility over doing flips and stuff. And it's also really popular in Eastern Europe. And one of my coaches, she was from Georgia, actually not the state, the country. Also Russian speaking, she was amazing. And so growing up in the States, there was this kind of post-Soviet community of people from all the different republics that became their own states later on. But most of the people who immigrated kind of just knew it as still this part of the Soviet Union. And I feel like people, when they immigrate, they bring certain aspects of their previous place of living with them, and it's kind of preserved in a little time capsule because you maybe haven't been back to your country in years or if ever, and so you just have these memories of what it was like. Meanwhile, people who stayed in that country keep changing, and everything there just keeps changing. So in some ways, some people are like, okay, well, do you associate with like Ukrainian, or you Russian, Soviet, post-Soviet? I kind of like associate with all of them. And I'm not going to sort of deny any Russianness, which is like what a lot of people, there's been a lot of trends of that, almost like a lot of people are actually trying to stop speaking the language, and in some ways it was imposed upon Ukraine by the Soviet Union just for the sake of like a standardization. You know, you have this big country and everyone's speaking a different language. How can you really work as a unit, as a whole? So there's a lot of history kind of interwoven into my existence that I've had to be aware of, like, since a very little kid, and it's made life interesting. And now with the current events, it's like everything has kind of culminated, but all these things were already happening and brewing underneath the surface. It was like a pimple waiting to pop. Yeah.
Waiting to pop. I use that analogy all the time.
Yeah, I've heard you. I got that from you. Like, I'm gonna.
You got that from me?
Like, I'm gonna pop you like a pimple.
Let's dive into that. And I've been wanting to get Masha on the podcast for this reason, because she has a very, like, I've always wanted to talk to you ever since Russia's war with Ukraine has started. I've always wanted to hear the perspective of someone who was born there, someone who has a lot of ties there. And Masha is very much American in our community. And, I think Americans don't necessarily understand. I don't understand a lot of the nuance that's happening. And I don't think the media and the news outlets necessarily give us an honest read on what's going on. When this all began, I don't know, what is this, 9 months ago? Something like that? What were your first thoughts? Did you have any family members that were very affected or friends? And how was that for you?
I work with a bunch of people who are in Ukraine, I mean, remotely, and a lot of them were in a city that got attacked pretty heavily the first days or so. And the funny thing was, they were like, you know, that morning, none of them showed up to the morning meeting. We're like looking at the news and we're like, oh crap. And then some of them get online later or something, and they're like, oh, don't worry, like, this is just gonna like be like a weekend thing. We'll be back on like Monday. And, you know, of course, it was so strange how not seriously they were taking it, whereas we were looking from the outside and being like, oh shit, this is real, you know. For like the months leading up to it, we were watching from satellite images as Russia kept stockpiling troops along the border and supplies and all this stuff. So we're like, this really looks like it's going to happen. But, you know, on their side, their president was like, okay, guys, don't panic, you know, don't take all your money out of the bank, don't try to like exit the country, you know. And some people did, but not a lot of people, because they didn't think it was going to be that bad. And, you know, I think that maybe there was like a little bit of propaganda on even the Ukrainian side, where they're like, you know, we just don't want our people to panic because shit might about to get real, but we don't want to have this like mass, you know, like when COVID hit here and everyone was like buying up toilet paper for no reason. And
I mean, from my perspective, when all this started, it was just like, I was Twitter doom scrolling. I was paying a lot of attention. And all I remember was people leaving.
Yeah.
That's what I
mean, a lot of people were leaving and did leave. And it felt like that was a big emphasis by Western media. They're like, oh, this is the biggest displacement of people. But I think also just as like Americans and Europeans and just the West in general, that's what we saw. So, because that was our perspective, you see all these people coming out of this crazy place with not as much perspective of what's going on inside. Because obviously, I mean, it's not like we're going to send reporters there. I mean,
right. Inside in that moment.
Exactly. And news sources from the inside are usually like twisted for their particular purpose or another, or if they're like independent news sources, those people are kind of like huge targets, especially by the Russians. But still, I mean, I usually try to keep up with like more independent news sources that kind of show a more honest, like, people's representation. But yeah, when it all started, you know, I'm friends on Facebook with some family members who live in Russia, and anytime I would post something about, you know, children hiding in subways as a makeshift bomb shelter, and like, they would reply with like, this is staged. Like, the Ukrainians, like, this is obviously a set. Like, this is not happening. The Ukrainians just made this video to make us look bad. And that was just a common theme. And, you know, as the war went on and Ukrainians actually reclaimed certain towns and cities, I mean, I think you've heard of like some of the atrocities that they've found. And the Russians just
mass graves and like,
yeah, and just people with like their hands tied behind their back, and, you know, like tons of women being raped. It's almost like, it's like, is this a medieval war? Like, at first, you know, I also thought, I was like, this is a very outdated war, because it just seems like it's like a land grab or something. Like, it's very imperialist, like, very 19th 20th century. Like, okay, we're in the 21st century. Like, we understand that like lines between countries are just more for like geographical and possibly economical distinctions. But why push the boundaries of borders? But I mean, really, this war technically has started as early as 2014, when Putin came and took over Crimea. Yeah. My family, we actually have some relatives that like lived in the Donbass region, like around, you know, they talk about like Donetsk and all these areas where Russia's like really heavily been trying to take over. And that area, they haven't stopped fighting since 2014. Like, there's been a little micro war happening there for years. And yeah, the unfortunate thing is like the family that I do have there are like pro-Russia for some reason.
In Ukraine.
They actually...
So that's a thing.
It is a thing, but I think that they're just kind of brainwashed by like the Russian media machine. And I think that there was a lot of Ukrainians also talked about Russia putting plants in like those areas of Ukraine, just like soldiers dressed in plain clothes that acted like civilians and through protests, and were very actively, vocally like, we want to be part of Russia, to possibly convince some of the people living there that they also want to be
part of Russia.
Yeah.
But okay, so the people that sentiment, are they also in regions where they're getting attacked?
Yeah.
Yeah, so is there a...
It makes
a rational situation
No, it makes no sense. And honestly, my dad had to like stop talking to those relatives, because he was like, if you just feel like you're talking to a wall, you can't even like have a conversation.
And so when they are getting attacked, or if they experience a bombing that day, what do they say? Like, is that Russia? Do they say that's Russia bombing us, or
do they say that's Russia liberating us?
Right. Oh, okay. I understand the mindset there. So I was gonna say, I was like, Ukrainians are united against Putin in this war, but not really. Is it kind of like America in that way? Like, America is very divided right now.
Well, and Ukraine has historically been pretty divided. Because it's like, it's such a big country. It's the size of Texas, and there's a bunch of different regions and a lot of different kind of subcultures, microcultures, I'd say, like almost like a lot of like cities and villages and counties even have their own kind of vibe and like sense of humor. I mean, kind of like how someone from Texas is different than someone from Oregon or Oklahoma.
Right.
So in that way, there is a lot of diversity. And
I mean, I guess I can't be so surprised by that, but it does surprise me that if you're actually getting physically threatened, then if they do feel like they're getting liberated.
I mean, I don't really know, and maybe I should reach out to them to see. I feel like probably by now they've moved to Russia, which is what a lot of Ukrainians did that lived around the border, where there was a lot of fighting, and like if they have little kids, they're like, I don't want my kid to grow up with this, so they'll move to Russia. And like
and is that something you can do in the Russia will happily take a Ukrainian citizen?
I'm not gonna like pretend like I'm an expert on this type of stuff, because
yeah.
But I met some people early on in the war. I went down to the border with Mexico and interviewed a few refugees. And there were some that had gone since 2014 to live in Russia for a while. But even then, he said that all of his kids were getting made fun of in school for being Ukrainian, and them kind of just saying oh, you're coming here and taking our jobs, or taking our resources. And it almost came to, he said that his kids didn't even want to be in school. And so then when the big war happened, they were like, okay, we got to get out of here, leave our cows. And cows. They had actual cows and stuff. They were they kind of live in some ways that they have that their ancestors have still lived, which is kind of the perks of being in a place for many generations. There's a lot of steeped traditions. He said that his family had a really hard time getting out of there because they had been living in Russia for the last few years, and there was this extra proof that you had to do. Anyway, Ukraine is pretty divided, and there's some parts that are really close to Poland, and there's parts, and there's people in Ukraine that have been wanting to join the EU for the longest time, because they're we're pretty much part of Europe. Their culture and people is not that different from Poland. Poland's part of the EU. Anyway, there's tons of Eastern European countries that are part of the EU, and that Ukraine feels that they're just as European as them. And of course, Russia could not have that. They're well, if you're going to join the EU, you're going to join NATO, you're sharing a border with us, and everyone hates us. So, no, you guys are kind of destined to just be Russia's little brother or whatever in this weird political landscape. And I think that that's also maybe part of Putin's impetus for the war. Like, he sees Ukraine as like slowly kind of slipping away into this like more European way of life. Like, if you look at statistics, there's like most Ukrainians have an international passport and they're able to travel, and most have traveled and visited some other country outside of their own in their lifetimes. Whereas in Russia, it's like a very small percentage.
I saw in the news that there was going to be a draft in Russia. And that's when I asked you your thoughts on that and what's going on. And you had said, yeah, people are leaving. People are leaving Russia. Young men are leaving Russia. Can you tell me, can you talk about that?
Yeah, I heard of some smaller town that they just kind of like put a checkpoint in the only road going in and out of it. And every car they check that's leaving the town, and they see if there's a man in the car, and they turn it around. If there's a woman driving, they like search the entire car to make sure she's not hiding a man. I mean, a lot of people don't want to fight this war. There's been like crazy news stories I'm sure you've heard of a few times, like people getting drafted and then they go into the recruitment office and they like shoot the recruitment officer.
No, I haven't seen that.
Yeah, so there have been like actually a few recruitment office shootings. And then and right before he does it, he's like, okay, well, all of us who got recruited today get to go home. But then I'm like, I mean, they're going to just put him in jail. Also, what I've heard is now they've been recruiting criminals. So people who already had been in jail for, murder, theft, whatever, like, real criminals being now sentenced to go fight the war in Ukraine. Which is crazy to me, because it's like,
wow.
How can you trust someone that you've just put in jail to fight for your country?
Yeah, what's the incentive there? I mean, the incentive is you could try to escape because you're out in the wild. Yeah.
Or you can give yourself in. So, and Ukraine has been really clear about how Russian soldiers can give themselves in to Ukraine. Yet Russian propaganda says if you turn yourself in to the Ukrainians, it's like, no, I don't want to fight this war, I give up. They're going to chop off your balls.
Wait, like for real? That's what they say?
Yeah. I mean, and like, this is from things I heard and talked to from other people who are there. So it's like, it is crazy. Some of these stories kind of reach some sort of weird mythic proportions, right. But this is also kind of the way that Russian propaganda works. It's like this weird, is like cusping on conspiracy, kind of turns the world into this like magical realism place that doesn't actually exist, but they make it exist in your mind, and then you start believing everything that they feed you. Like the West is evil, and we're the best country in the world. I mean, people who live in like a deep village in Russia or Siberia, they have blockers on certain websites that they can visit. So only if you're kind of more tech savvy and you can use a VPN and even understand that, a lot of major information is being blocked, then you can get around it. But for most people who grow up in like small village, middle of nowhere, all they have access to is Russian TV and this like blocked version of the internet. They don't have access to facts, and they're just going to believe whatever they're spoon-fed. It's like one of those horror movies, And if there's no one there in your village to be like, hey, you could just use a VPN and then you can go on Google. Yeah, you can go and look up the New York Times. You can and in the major cities of Moscow and St. Petersburg, there's like so many protests and a lot of a lot of younger people have been protesting the war, protesting the draft, and then they get just thrown in jail.
Like, if you get thrown in jail, are those people still in jail? They're just in jail forever with no court date type of thing?
They just have these like kind of arbitrary sentences. Like, I was looking at an article of this one activist that got thrown in jail for 5 years. He was just like a performance art activist. Like, he would like dress up as Jesus and go to these like recruitment rallies. I'm really fascinated by a lot of these like subcultural linings. Like, people's lives are being messed up in these really weird ways because of this war, and like a lot of people like don't want to have anything to do with it. They just want to live their lives. You know, they just want to do what they love, take care of their family. They're kind of just caught in between a war that they didn't even choose to have.
You're talking about Russians or Ukrainians?
Both. You know, I feel like the general populace of both countries thinks it's really stupid.
Are people going back now that it's kind of like a long-term war and they're not trying to be a refugee somewhere?
Some are, and it really comes down to a personal choice, you know. Like someone I was talking to who's in Kharkov, which is Americans pronounce it Kharkiv. That was like one of the cities to get pretty devastated in the beginning, that it's like feeling relatively safe there now, and they're kind of getting back to their lives, even though I'm sure it's like living in a post-war zone. I think some are trying to stay wherever they're at more long-term. Like, when my family left, it was kind of a decision my parents had to make, and then no turning back.
I don't know if Americans even can relate to that, because we are living where everybody wants to be, ironically, because it's also... not
necessarily, because, you know, America gave out a bunch of visas to Ukrainians, like, I forget, like a couple 100,000 or something. It was insane because of the war, and none of them, they haven't all been taken. Like, maybe like 20% of them have. Well, there's like a lot of people from other countries elsewhere that have, you know, felt a similar sort of war-torn displacement, but have not gotten the opportunity to get a visa to go to the US and have been waiting for years. And now they see that US has given Ukrainians, you know, whatever, 100,000 visas that haven't even been used up. They're kind of pissed because, and so in that ways it seems kind of like racist that they're like, well, you're only doing this because they're white or something. I think that it's a lot more complicated than that, and it's probably like still, this war is a result of the culmination of the Cold War, you know, which was a result of post-World War II. And, you know, during the Cold War, US and Russia were always at each other's throats. So I almost feel like this is a kind of like way to get back at Russia in some way or another. But I also don't know like what goes through the brains of like US, either politicians or
policy
people who are in charge of the visa situations.
As an American, it's interesting because there is still a sentiment, especially from our southern neighbors, that they want to be in America. But then you go out into Europe and to other parts of the world, Asia as well, and that's not necessarily the sentiment. Like, I saw one time, and it was when there was a bunch of school shootings right in a row. I think it was around the time of Uvalde. You know, there was bulletins for people traveling to the U.S. and basically it's like big star, you know, highlighted, America is not safe.
They're shooting their children.
You can get shot at the mall, which you can. But as an American, I don't think to myself, I can't go to the grocery store. It doesn't feel like a war zone. I'm still going to Trader Joe's with my child, you know, like it doesn't feel that way. But interesting when I have traveled outside the country, which was way before the pandemic, before me having a kid, that perspective is very different in some ways. And then in other ways, depending on what country you're in, I would remember just turning on the TV in the hotel, and every news organization was talking about the politics in America. Like, the world cares about American politics more than America cares about the politics in other places. Because it affects, it can sometimes affect the entire world. It's so hard for us to, like, even a very curious person like me, there's only, like, you've surprised me with some of the stuff that you've said today that I just never would have heard, even if I'm seeking out the information. I would say the majority opinion in America has been to support Ukraine.
This is like a war for democracy, and Ukrainians are trying to defend their own democracy and not get taken over by this regime of authoritarian regime of dictator. Like, they have free elections. They have elected their officials. They have kicked out. They used to have a more like oligarch type of president that was more of like a puppet-ish of Russia, and they kicked him out. He ran away. The outcome of this war is probably going to directly affect everyone else in the world, whether they like it or not, because it has been the result of a culmination of this clash of ideologies, identities, but also countries. And I think that in order to get a true perspective, really, you have to seek out people who are from there and ask them about it. But maybe they don't want to talk about it, or what they've been through is so extremely hard that they don't want to talk about it.
So I had asked Masha, and basically she had taken a while to decide if she even wanted to come on and be a voice, because there is some risk involved.
Well, there was, like, people who were protesting were getting years in jail. I had heard about a law that Putin had put out that anyone who helps Ukraine, who, was a post-Soviet citizen, whatever, if when they get to Russia, they would also be thrown in jail for like 2 to 5 years. And, my dad had been helping with Ukraine and sending medical supplies over there since Crimea happened, organizing and like helping a bunch of other people who kind of took over this system of buying wholesale from different medical supply companies and just sending it directly to medics and soldiers out on the battlefield. And, in this way, it's like, that was almost like the best possible action that we can do as civilians to help, because they had such a deficit of like basic supplies. Yeah, I became like more paranoid about posting anything about that on the internet after seeing that. But then I was like, but do I really want to be in Russia right now? Or in the next foreseeable future? I think that Russia has the potential to radically change again. Like, it's ripe for possibly having another revolution. But in the beginning of every revolution, there's the idealists who want this revolution to happen because they see how messed up the current situation is. And then there comes a second wave, and even a third possibly wave of like power grabbers and people who see the revolution as this like overturning of power and try to grab as much of it as they can. I hope that Russia could have a more beautiful, peaceful existence, and the majority of the population does not have to be like poor and destitute, because right now they have like a handful of billionaires who are kind of like hoarding the wealth of the entire country. It's like really no different than imperialist Russia, and like what were the peasants fighting to overthrow here? And communism was more for like equality for everyone, but it still ended up being like a few people taking advantage.
Well, and there's also sanctions that America has placed, and that is hurting the Russian.
They're acting like they don't care. They're like, we don't need your McDonald's and your Starbucks. Like, we can be our own island, which is like, then I'm like, okay, now they're turning themselves into like a giant North Korea. I have friends that live there, and of course they're not gonna even write on like, some messenger app or whatever, oh, Russia sucks, because even then they're paranoid about what can get tracked and like get in trouble for that kind of stuff. But I've talked to someone who lives in Russia currently and, left for an event and came back, and he is very much against the war. And he said most people who were against the war have left or tried to leave by now.
If you guys don't know, like Masha, the name Masha in your region is like the name Sarah here, right?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot.
Yeah, super, super, super common. So I'm not using your last name for a reason.
I just like needed some time to get over and some of these paranoid thoughts, because also in the end, that's what this propaganda and media tactic is trying to do. It's trying to keep people silent. It's trying to keep people from doing things that they think is right.
I mean, that is like authoritarian government 101, right?
Yeah, doing stuff like this is kind of an ultimate form of rebellion. I don't know if that's the right word. I'm
so proud of you for wanting to use your voice, because using your voice just because is one thing. Using your voice under duress is a completely different thing. This is how we understand what's really going on. The media is always skewed, no matter which media source you are reading or looking at.
I guess another interesting aspect I wanted to touch on, because I talked to my mom a lot about this. She watches a lot of both Russian and Ukrainian TV to try and like get at both sides, understand what's really going on. When the war first started, the US and the West could have come in with their, big guns, missile firing. They could have closed the skies and all this stuff and kind of stopped the war in its tracks. But they were afraid of World War II or World War III. They didn't want to get attacked by Russia. And right now, Russia's getting most of its missiles and bombs from Iran. The theory is they want this war to drag on because they've been so sloppy with their bombs. Like they've been like hitting stuff where sometimes there's nothing there. Like in Odessa, they hit like a public bathroom.
Are you talking about Russia?
Yeah. So there's this idea that they just want them to just like use up all the bombs and missiles so that they can't attack anyone else.
And destroy Ukraine in the process?
Yeah. So it's almost like, the US has been supporting Ukraine, but like really a pretty small amount in comparison. Biden's trying to get through this bill of like, spending however many billions of dollars to help Ukraine militarily. But really, that's like maybe like we spent that much money on one day when we were like doing the war in Iraq.
Oh, okay. In comparison.
By comparison. And they're only giving the Ukrainians certain missiles that can kind of like only like defensive weapons. So like missiles that can kind of block other missiles from coming at them. But also from where they can launch them to where they land, they only have like 100 or so miles, where Russia has missiles that can fly for like many, 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 many miles. Sound like an expert and get misquoted and add to more of the misinformation, but these are just like other perspectives and things to think about in the grand scheme of the war. Like, why is the US being like, hey, Ukraine, we're on your team, but we're like not going to fully help you. We're just going to like keep you going at like the bare minimum, like to keep you alive and not get completely destroyed. And the Ukrainians have just kind of been super inventive on making solutions on their own. Like one of the people that I'm working with, because Russians started to bomb like electricity stations and water supplies, like, and winter's coming. So people are like without electricity, without heat, without water in the winter. And in Ukraine, it does get pretty cold. One of the people we're working with has like this elaborate set of like multiple car batteries hooked together so that like he can still have electricity when the electricity goes out. But still, they've been really heroic and amazing at rebuilding things as they get destroyed.
I mean, is life still going on? Is it like, are people still are kids going to school? Are people going to work? Like, is there offices to go to?
I guess so. I mean, the people that I work with, obviously, they left their office. They've just been working from their laptops. And I don't know about school. That's a good question. But, you know, it also just depends on the region and the locality.
Right. It's a big country.
It seems like in Kharkiv, it's pretty safe now. And that, like, the heat from that area has kind of toned down. And, you know, I've been wanting to visit. I actually, like, had this, like, pang of, like, I felt like I wanted to visit so bad earlier this year. I wonder what is going to be the moment where we're like, okay, it's actually safe. Like, we can go. You know, what is going to be that moment? I don't know. What would be that moment for you?
There's no way for me to even relate to this. Like, I mean, us Americans, we're just so safe over here because we've got these two huge bodies of water on both sides. And we've got, quote unquote, friendly neighbors, you know, north and south. Like, I'm so sheltered here. I feel like I'm so sheltered. And I admit to, you know, it's like, I can't even relate to that question. Like, I don't even know what to say because I've never been in that I've never had that perspective. I am a first generation. So my parents, you know, did come from the Philippines, although we're Chinese. Yeah, I don't even know, Masha. No idea. I think there's very few Americans who have been here for generations that really understand the gravity of that. And so when we do hear about like people like trekking all the way from Venezuela to cross our border, and we, as a country, have, you know, no empathy for that. Yeah, Masha, this was originally for the Expecting Aerialist, which I do think I'm still going to post it there because the more people who get to listen to this story, the better. But we didn't really talk about you as an aerialist or a contortionist because other things were more important.
Oh, yeah, the hypermobility thing. Oh, yeah.
Masha's so funny. She drops into my class and she just... When did you start contortion? When you were like 13? Pretty late, actually.
Yeah. I started, you know, really getting into stretching at like 13, where I was like, I want to be flexible. I couldn't do the splits. When I was like 13, and by the time I was 14, I was doing like over splits.
I can't imagine any artists are having any artistic life over there. Are they? Can they? I mean, being an artist is, you know, a lot of artists are slightly starving artists and poor, but it is a privilege to have the time and the place to be an artist. Has that sentiment kind of, you know, you're in a war-torn country, is it just impossible?
I mean, I think that in some ways, probably it gives you an outlet for all these emotions and things that come up. And also as an artist, you're able to represent your life.
Yeah, so in a way it's more important than ever, but I can't imagine a lot of like aerial studios being open in Ukraine right now.
Yeah, I should check, because I had befriended some aerial people in Ukraine.
Well, and then also there's a very like rich history of artistry, like rhythmic gymnastics and circus in Ukraine, in Russia.
Yeah.
There's a huge history of that. So there's got to be...
Well, people take it really seriously there. They're like, oh, if you decided you want to do this, you know...
Yeah, like I don't see
do it.
You don't see a lot of like casual beginners coming out of those countries. It's people who take it very seriously.
You know, and people really love to work hard. I think that there's this work ethic that you don't see as often in the States, and maybe it is because we have it all nice and good, and we already have the life that many people in other countries may aspire to have. Well, like, you know, anything is available. We can be like, oh, okay, yeah, you want to go drive to this place or go do this thing. Like, I think we take for granted how much freedom we have.
Is being there something you would want to just visit, or would you want to live there again in the future?
Maybe. I also just kind of want to go there and get a better sense of, you know, what's happening. And also, I imagine like the whole rebuilding of the country process is going to take some time, and we'll probably need help. Yeah. And so understanding better like what people need and how I can help, because I have like, you know, all these connections here and know all these people that are like, hey, I want to help. And, you know, I can go over there and find out like, well, what's the best possible way to help? Because, you know, donating to like nonprofits and all this stuff is like, all that money just kind of gets lost. A lot of it gets lost along the way, or, oh, my computer's running low on battery. So I am a big proponent, fan, would like to do more of like just connecting people so that they can just like help each other and like feel deep joy that you feel when you help each other and like make the world a better place.
Thank you so much to Masha for carving out the time and being brave and really speaking her mind. I appreciate you. I'm so proud of you. And, you know, I think that the perspective and really listening to real people is really important. Yeah, so if you guys go to the show notes, I've got lots there. If you're interested in aerial rehab, if you're interested in the mini course or my full course, lots of other free stuff going on the website. So check the show notes for that link. And if you love hearing this, there's the bean. If you love hearing the sound of my voice, greener grass is always fun. Check that out on the Digent Podcast Network and all the other ones that are also health and wellness based. Thank you to Asa Watkins, sound engineer, and give us a 5-star rating or review anywhere you get your podcasts. I appreciate you forever. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you. Over and out. This is the Expecting Aerialist.
Open up.